lots of things to think about here, and I think I have had more time than most to think about being an agent of the state. Within the context, this is all a lot of highly socio-political conversation during a very sensitive time, so I'll understand if you don't want to listen to all this, but, you know, I've worked in government briefly, and been a public servant, and my understanding of being a public servant is doing a whole lot of crap that keeps the world running and not getting any credit. So there's that side of government where absolutely, you know, the Parks and Rec show where like absolutely nobody wants to applaud when the sewer system works properly, but we're all very grateful that it continues to exist, right? I always think of one of those demons in Hercules, you know, the movie where he's like, indoor plumbing, it's gonna be big. And I'm like, yeah, it is big. You were right. Indoor plumbing is huge. Shout out to indoor plumbing. Every time that my toilet gets like too dirty, I see that and I'm like, I'm letting all the people who like participate in toilets like down. I'm letting them down. The people who built the toilet, the plumbers who installed the toilet, the people who like regrouted the, you know, like everyone involved in this toilet being here today. I'm letting them down when that toilet gets dirty. Is that like really high key? Yes. Do I take myself that seriously all the time? Probably more than I should. Is it a very interdependent means of acknowledging every last bit of labor that goes into the experience that is my life when it comes to the social contract of people that I actually am like kind of beholden to? Yeah, it feels very sane to think that way, and it feels very insane to not be paying attention to that kind of thing. So, part of my argument here is that everyone is more or less in that position where people just want like time to have hobbies. They have just realized, you know, in this cosmological scale, right, using all of space and time to contextualize lifetime of the human species, and then within that time frame looking at the human species and being like, from a developmental perspective, the species, our species, is at a point where it's realizing like how much more capable it is of things, art, music, who knows, right? Like we have so much potential. And really low self-esteem. Not a great place for a species to be. So yeah, we all really just want to be investing in our hobbies. We want to have time to spend with our loved ones, I'm a huge absolutely worst model for hobby, like work-life balance, because I try to have 10 billion hobbies and then also 10 billion jobs because I'm like, we could do it all, and obviously we are not doing it all, so I'm like, maybe just me can do it all. No, that's not true. It's not true at all. But a part of me, a really big part of me, who's very excited about the world, who really enjoys exploring it with curiosity, who gets so much joy out of just very simple stuff, and like really am just pleased to wake up every day, that person is just like crushingly sad that a very few select group of people on this earth get to share that positionality with me. And I know how useful is the white woman's tears, as it were. But it's a deeply depressing thing to achieve a level of success that I've been working on towards my whole life, in the sense that I want the ability and capacity to pursue my hobbies, my artistic talents, my most passionate beliefs, and also have health and have access to organic, locally grown food. I am like have successfully implemented the kind of kitchen I have always wanted, like angrily always wanted to have this kind of kitchen that I have been like brute forcing into my house, but with wonderfully delicious results. I've always wanted to have this like thing in my life, and now it's here, and I'm realizing that it's the slog portion of the marathon. The fun part about marathons, and everybody should really start, if you don't already, you should really start mentally and emotionally self-categorizing into the social group of athletes who do marathons. Personally, I think of myself as more of like an emotional athlete in that sense, but marathoning is a thing. It's a skill. It's about like a appropriate application of your time and energy, and it's like difficult to do. So amazing stuff, athletes. You're doing so great, and you inspire me all the time, and I think about the way that you do your work, and I apply it in my life. So really, anyway, the kitchen portion of things, I'm like, yes, finally got the kitchen, doing it now. We're at the fucking lame part of building cool habits where doing it now is the most shitty thing in the world. I don't want to cook all the time. I want somebody else to cook, right? Like, I'm done. I did it for months. I did it for weeks. I actually did it for like a lot of years. Actually, this is many years of evolving the kitchen setup, and the way I designed the kitchen situation, hopefully, is that it will continue to evolve in pace and in time with me and my body throughout my life. That was my solution for eating disorder scary, which it is, and it sucks. I've never been diagnosed. Disordered eating, bad. Yes, it is, and it sucks. So, like, this is my angry assertion of my own desires into my life, is to have this, like, evolving, living experience of a kitchen. And that is also a practice of revolution, right? It's like feeling in control of your kitchen. Hugely difficult. And you have all these invasive parasitic behaviors on top of like really shitty living situations that make kitchen joy very difficult or complex. It's a very complex type of joy, is maybe the way I would put it. I once told a friend, she and I were like cooking together at my old place, and I was telling them that like every single item in my kitchen has a million pieces of other people invested in it, because they're meals that I like shared with people. And on top of that, it has like my psychological weight for every relationship that has ever occurred for me with like a cake pan or that cake pan, or many other things. And so like healing relationships with food has such a complex amount of layers to it, and it is my joy, as I've mentioned, it is my joy and my pleasure to make things like effortless. I think it's fun to do it that way, and I think it's inspiring, and it makes people think it can be done easier than they think it will take before they see somebody else do it effortlessly. And so trying for that effect, not trying to make people think, oh, only she can do it because she's so special, obviously it's impossible for anybody else. Really don't want to hit that note because it's not true. Don't know why I'm getting into this, but this kitchen relationship is just like years and years, like more than a decade and a half in the making. I would say 2 decades, very easily 2 decades in the making. I'm very happy with where it is, but we're at the point in the most recently acquired like evolution, essentially, last like 4 to 5 months, which has been great. I'm not complaining about it. Amazing amount of delicious, ready to make food is always available for me, and it's just like so nice. But the thing I am complaining about is the slog. We are at the slogging part of habit forming. And every time you form a new really good habit, you have to still get through the week or two where you would rather do anything than that habit. Anything at all. Like, just anything other than more cooking, right? Like, you finished. Some part of your brain is like, no, I'm done. I learned the thing, and now we're done. We don't do anymore. And that's my brain right now. It's like, no. And I did try to build this in by choosing meals that would like bulk create, like it would make enough food that I could eat, like I said, 5 to 7 days. I don't know. I'm really stoked that what I have right now in the fridge is going to last me through several days of not having to think about food, because at this point, that's sort of what I'm cooking for, is like, okay, now not only can I do delicious, exactly to my taste meals, but I can do it in a way where my like time sense is satisfied, because that was a huge part of making this work, in a way where I could then like orient away from the kitchen. And I think that has been a huge, deeply complex psychological weight on the American people has been our kitchens. Sears knows, department stores definitely know this about us. Anybody who capitalized on our love of kitchen appliances knows this about us, and that's one reason why I aggressively don't use a whole lot of kitchen appliances. Not because it wouldn't make my life easier, although it definitely will, and I'm super looking forward to it later when I consider myself slightly more disabled than I currently am. But the main like purpose of my kitchen is to train myself on like modes of thinking and behaviors that are going to inform lifelong healthy delicious eating habits that can scale beyond a single individual to multiple individuals, but also that can just feed me and potentially feed me through long periods of me not wanting to cook or having a diversity of life decisions. I know that you have heard me say all of this before, but it is a very reasonable baseline for commonality for us to all use as a species when it comes to finding commonalities. I think healthy food behaviors is a great public health thing to orient behind, and the joy, the shared joy of cooking together is a healthy thing for us to unify around. So I do that in my heart, I do that in my head. One of the upcoming goals of my delicious, amazing kitchen is to make soba noodles by hand. It'll be a challenge, but not right now, right? Like, we have evolved to the place in the kitchen where it's all just ready to eat, and I'm actually really hungry, which is why we're talking about food right now. But I am definitely also at the place where I don't fucking want to anymore, Like, I'm like, okay, this is enough. I'm tired of feeding myself, thanks. We live in a modern world. Other people could do this for me. Can't I just pay somebody to do this for me? Actually, no, I can't. I cannot afford to pay anybody to feed me. It's not in my financial means to do so, and that is a huge aspect of all of this work that I've done on the kitchen. In 2020, when COVID-19 started, the first thing outside of, hey, where are all the quarantine hospitals and quarantine protocol and extra medical staff and like the type of preparation I would expect to see in anticipation of a serious pandemic, especially a seriously brutal one that kills a lot of people, right? Um, but one of the things I noticed in those very early times, wait, why am I talking about this? Oh, food service, still open. You can still just buy food and people will bring you food. I'm like, food is one of the quickest ways to pass a virus. Easiest, quickest way. You want to actually retard the spread of a disease, then you actually impose things like genuine quarantine. And no criticism here, okay? Like, first of all, to every person at the policy and medical professional level where you were doing active work to prevent, like, increased numbers of death and dying, you did your best. Like, I'm just going to assume that, because we have to assume that about our medical community, is that they are doing their absolute best under some really shitty circumstances. So I first of all want to say that I'm not, like, targeting anybody with criticism here. I'm actually more targeting, like, the general populace and their poor literacy or seeming collective agreement on healthcare as a whole and preventative healthcare in specifics. And I'm not saying that people didn't know that that already existed. So considering where the average person, when we do average everybody, is when it comes to their level of suspicion towards the medical community, which, as I have mentioned, is super valid and just to have that level of distrust towards the American medical industrial complex. And really, I guess COVID was a good opportunity to re-educate people about vaccines and how they work, right? About medicine in general and how it works, and to pose the question of, like, okay, emerging medical technology, how are you going to handle it? Do you feel, like, literate and capable enough to make good decisions for yourself and your health? I don't think you do. I don't think most people do. It's a problem. How can we? How are you supposed to trust the medical industrial complex? You don't. A lot of people don't. And you do see this, like, going their own way thing with a lot of people when it comes to their medical health. They're like, you know what? Rather take my chances. And as always, I kind of toe the line with that. I'm like, well, I mean, like with the eye thing, like, oh, I could be infected, could have injured it, could also just need some rest. And honestly, it's feeling better, so I'm thinking it just needed some rest. I feel like I was going somewhere though. Cultural exchange via food. Yeah, something like that. That's already happening, right? Just thinking about more ethical and environmentally friendly practices for all of these things. Oh yeah, God, I do not want to cook anymore. One of the things that I've noticed about taking, okay, do this little thought experiment with me. You're gonna be embarrassed, probably. Have you ever gone a whole week where everything that went into your mouth was prepared by you? I don't think a lot of average Americans could say yes to that. that's been a part of the kitchen journey, just kind of trying to make that the default, trying to make it the default that everything that I eat, I made, and to just make that the norm. And so I'm really working to build that into like a habit of like a year or more, where like more often than not, everything I eat, I made, but not just that, but like everything. And obviously I'm not super great at that. I have a French fry addiction that cannot be like tamed or contained, and I occasionally also get really excited about onion rings in a similar manner. And many other restaurants that I am always thinking about visiting. I remember when I first moved to Humboldt County, people would complain about the restaurants all the time. They'd be like, flavorless, essentially, was the complaint when I first moved here. And I personally could not agree with that assessment. Because a part of what I noticed almost immediately upon moving here was that almost everything is like really locally like accessible. And locally to me, right? Coming from an urban center in the middle of a landlocked country, having access to like community supported agriculture, locally sourced grocery stores. First of all, that's kind of rare in America as a whole, kind of special in its own way. This region is wealthy in food in a way that makes it somewhat independent, and that is a huge draw for a lot of people around America. A lot of people went out for homesteading, a lot of people went into tiny homes. There was like a giant movement towards this, being able to grow your own food thing. I just happened to end up in a county where locally sourced ingredients were actually not that hard to find. And so when people would complain to me about the restaurants being like flavorless, I could not agree. And it took me a really long time to figure out why. Actually, I realized like food in the body, and the way that you feel it in the body and the way that you interpret food in the body is a process that takes weeks and months. And that type of that like length of thinking time is something we rarely give any proper amount of space for in our fast-paced rat race day-to-day lives. So this long-form means of elaborating our environment, aka eating, is a slow 2 to 4 week process. And 3 months ultimately, like if you're gonna change your like microbiome in a significant way, it takes about 3 months to like orient it towards new noms, new nutrients, and that depends on how frequently you mess with your diet. I really love having a varied diet, and I have perfected messing with it in a way that doesn't make me deeply gastrointestinally uncomfortable, or I accept my gastrointestinal discomfort as the natural consequence of being so exploratory in my palate. But coming from a living tradition of dead food, essentially, of canned food, and no knocking canned food, that was a wonderful invention, we just need to use it appropriately. But in growing up more often than not on food that wasn't fresh, and that being the norm for people, a significant amount of people in America and in the world, unfortunately, but definitely more America than anyone else. Like, we have a pretty pretty bad situation when it comes to food here, don't we? Doesn't we? Don't we? But coming from that and like eating here, I was like, I mean, I don't think they're like, I honestly do think they are under flavoring their food, regardless of the ethnicity in the region, like the type of food that it was. I do feel that they were under flavoring it, but I think it was kind of meant to highlight how delicious the natural, organic, like locally grown food really is. And I don't mean delicious. I mean like nutritionally valuable. And so I would go out and I would eat food at these restaurants, and like maybe I would find them under flavored or not like punching me in the mouth with their flavor, but I also found them like quite satisfying, well beyond what I was used to when it came to like empty calories and microwaved meals, right? I was just like, that's it's like a step up, and it's a significant and obvious step up. So while I couldn't at the time articulate like what I knew to be a difference in quality between like restaurants where you eat out in this region versus restaurants where you eat out in other regions, I could still articulate that there was a difference in quality, and it had nothing to do with like taste, like on my tongue taste. It was much more complex, and it took me a long time to like really think about why that might be. And I didn't participate in that retroactive like applying of reasons sort of thing that you might suspect me of doing in this case. But I really did like try to feel through my body as I changed my diet. I changed my diet a lot in the last like 5 to 6 years in pursuit of a healthier life, but also in some ways just kind of experimenting with this idea of like empty versus full calories and how it feels in the body to like experience a steady diet of empty calories compared to a steady diet of not empty calories. And that's why sometimes you'll notice that I live completely sustained by French fries, because I'm like, oh, it's time for an empty calorie time, you know. And it's a really like in the body experience, and I'm not gonna say that it's unique to me, because I think it's everybody is capable of feeling this, but I do think it takes a certain perfect storm of conditions to be able to acknowledge it and notice it in the fast-paced rat race life we live. And of course, there's all sorts of interpersonal cognitive things that everybody has to move through when it comes to their relationships with food in the first place. As I've mentioned, it's a very deeply complex and personal experience that I'm totally sharing with you, partially because I'm very proud of myself for having built a robust enough structure that it's shareable without collapsing, but also because I think it's worth sharing and important to share how nutrition will shape and affect your entire life and outlook on life, to be quite honest. But this triumph that I am experiencing with food, and the complete and fully justified amount of pride that I am feeling in this accomplishment is this success does not in any way change the fact that I am tired of cooking, right? Like, one of the things that I got out of taking over all of the food and taking it back from anybody else cooking for me, it all had to be me again, and like really me. It was like, oh no, I need dessert, like I need sweets, I need something sweet, and I hate candy manufacturers with a blinding passion in the same way I hate Nestle, for obvious reasons that people should just know by now. But I don't hate the candy manufacturer in downtown Eureka, okay? You're off the hook. And certain candy manufacturers out there who are doing it like in the old school small scale type of way, cool, keep it going. You're not my target at all. But the Hasbros of it all are really just, there's just no excuse for that level of like willfully poisoning the American people with empty calories and high sugar content, as much as your confections are like dopaminically enjoyable. They add no other value, and I think that is not acceptable. But, you know, I'm just like a person who rains on parades, apparently. I didn't get to grow up with cable TV, and I'm taking it out on you. Sorry about that. But I need sweets, and so recently I was like, well, I just made another round of chocolate chip cookies. I guess I'll make another round of chocolate chip cookies. And on the one hand, my house always smells like baked goods. Always nice. On the other hand, it is an unending amount of cooking. You are just constantly making stuff. Could I like mechanize this in some way that makes it quicker? Sure, I totally could. I have 3 fucking batches of chocolate chip cookies in the freezer, ready to go. Anytime I need a sweet, I got my chocolate chip cookies. They're there. They're ready to go. We're stoked. We're stoked and boked. Like, it's gonna happen for sure. I even have like a square of chocolate in the fridge, and that could totally satisfy my need for sweets, because I worked really hard to make sure squares of dark chocolate could do that for me. And I still continue that practice because, again, it's important to keep the thing alive. At the same time, there's only so many times you can eat a square of dark chocolate and be like, yeah, this is totally dessert, and for that to really be satisfying. No, you have to like go get ice cream, which, yes, I do that too. Ice cream and french fries are really, they are my like sweet treat jams. I might go get some ice cream today even. You don't know. It could be any. The day is full of wonder, and the future is unwritten. But it does get really exhausting to just always be self-providing. And I think that is one of the things that I thought about a lot when I thought about people who go their own way or decide to be alone monastically as a means of just lifestyle, whatever it is. I'm not including incels or men who go their own way. I think of them as a hate group. And also incels, by the way, incel, that term was coined by a woman, by the way, just for the record. The manosphere can definitely suck my right nut. Yeah, that just had to be said. It had to come out like that. Like everything, it was unavoidable. But yeah, at some point you just kind of get tired of self-pleasuring, right? Like at some point you just like, what does Blink-182 say? And I like take my toaster in the bath. Yeah, it gets grim and dark really easily and quickly when you're just your own partner. And that's like normal, right? Like that's what I wanted. I wanted to understand what that type of isolationism actually is, because as a femme person and somebody who was socialized as a woman, I've never experienced that type of cognitive isolationism. Men are socialized to be isolationized that way. Really, yeah, it's just you against the world, you and your army. But it's never us, right? Like it's a different way that we train boys than we train girls, generally speaking. So yeah, I wanted to know what it was like to experience my personhood and my sense of self as being socially isolated from what I consider to be like my default, like socially, constantly, psychologically been thinking a lot about that episode where it's just like agenderism because cyborgs aren't biological, and I'm just like, yes, that completely encapsulates my living experience, part of my gender identity, and really where I'm coming from when I'm talking about like, not only is agenderism and gender anarchism a huge aspect of my perceived gender identity, but also my argument towards people spending 50% of their times in digital environments, making them, at least from a psychic perspective, cyborgs. That means that the types of things that they interface with online, people, social groups, content, media, types of platforms, the type of space that you are engaging with online more often than not, is going to then act upon you and influence you as a person, as a being. It's going to change your perspective, your ideology, your sense of self, your environment, all of these different things, right? So for me to say like, I somewhat identify as a cyborg, and I think most people are cyborgs, and that means that we have a mechanized, collectively held social contract that has very obvious biases deeply embedded in it. And technically that means this is a great opportunity to rewrite the social contract at a species-wide level with potential, like, probability for success being fairly high. But it's going to be really difficult to do. We're all going to have to participate, like, autonomously. that part's going to be really hard. And like I said, nothing about my kitchen being in a great place makes it easier to handle how little I want to keep doing it right now. That's just the way that habit building works. Unfortunately, it's like once you accomplish it, once you're like, sweet, I do biking now, or sweet, I do this now, or sweet, I do that now, like that is now a thing that I do. It's a part of my identity as a person. It's a part of who I am as a person. And part of me deciding that is observing the behavior of me doing it, right? It's observing me cooking. It's observing me cooking and then me eating the food, and like it's observing me researching the recipe. It's observing me writing the recipe down. It's observing me recording the recipe, sharing it with you, and then re-observing it. A lot of different forms of observation here for me to become real again. Thank you very much. Self-perception does reify your existence. So it is very important that you're doing it positively and kindly. But nothing about any of those triumphs changes how little I actually want to do any more cooking, even though doing more cooking is the exact thing that I need to do to solidify this as a habit that I then don't have to think about and can actually automate to a certain extent without giving it as much psychological weight as I had to give it in order to start the habit. And that's one of the biggest things that gets people fucked up when they are trying to start new habits, is not adequately like assessing or accounting for the change in the psychological weight that you're giving different aspects of the habit building process in a way that's dynamic and quick enough that will allow you to then follow through on building the habit. And I've built enough habits in my life at this point that I am fairly familiar with how that process looks and where, for myself, I need to be putting the psychic weight at what times for me to be able to follow through and like actually complete the damn thing, right? And currently with the kitchen, I'm now at the place where like I absolutely do not want to cook anymore ever again. There's nothing in me that wants to continue cooking, and yet I am going to have to continue cooking right now in front of mine own very eyes in order to convince myself that this is a thing that I do and I just always do it and it's just the thing that I do. And once I'm convinced that that's the case, it'll be so much easier to automate it because my body will believe it before my mind has to think about it, right? That's the point of learning motion. That's the point. That's what you learn in fucking karate. You do muscle memory training. And to do that, you have to just do the thing. That's it. You just have to do it, and you have to observe yourself doing it. You do it, and you observe yourself doing it. That's how you train physical combat, close quarter combat. makes it automatic, which is going to improve the likelihood of you surviving a close quarter combat sort of experience. Personally, I don't think I have a huge likelihood in this moment of surviving that kind of experience because I have absolutely no discipline whatsoever and have not been practicing my CQC. But if I was practicing it, I would have a better chance. And currently, what I'm practicing is the kitchen aspect of my life. And it's been going so well. We're finally at the triumphal stage. We're finally at the stage where I feel I have, like, nailed making this habit a habit. And there is now the secret corridor of space where I just need to continue doing it and not ever acknowledge how much I totally nailed that shit until later, once it becomes a habit that I've automated so that I don't have to think about it with that much weight anymore. And then I can go back and self-congratulate. This is my process, but I like to remove the part where I celebrate until later, when it's already a habit. I don't want to celebrate yet. I'm not ready. And when I'm in my zone, I do manage to turn that transitional period where, like, okay, well now what we have to do is just reinforce the habit. We have to reinforce the behavior. We just have to do it, and so we have to see ourselves doing it, and then we can automate it to the point where the, like, dread of, like, spending 2 to 3 hours cooking is gone. Where I'm like, nope, that's what we do. We spend 2 to 3 hours cooking, and then the rest of the week we spend maybe 10 minutes cooking or preparing food. That's it. It's such a good use of time, but it's the Costco dilemma, that's what I call it, where you have to allocate up front a significant chunk of your investment in order to get the benefit. It sucks, but it is the rule of the kitchen, for sure. And it seems to be a rule of other things too, which I find interesting. So, you know, that's, I like came on today to really come back to at least weekly, but definitely more regular recording and uploading, after having improved the functionality and taken a break enough to, like, actually feel the joy of all of the triumphs. Now coming back to it with some more regularity, I'm like, how do I update you on the state of the cozy when the state of the world is so overwhelmingly horrible? Like, why would you even want to hear what I have to say about how things are going? To me, it just sort of feels like I'm rubbing it in your face that I'm having a great time individually, but things are really shitty in America, and there are people who are actively having the worst time. So, like, what right do I have to even start talking? And it's that exact thing that keeps people from, like, just continuing to talk. So here we are. But yeah, I'm at the part of the kitchen where we just gotta cook, and it's just gotta be made normal. And I guess I'm sharing it with you because this is my way of making this transitional part joyous. Oh yeah, I was gonna say, usually I tend to insert more joy into this portion of habit learning where, like, at the part where I am able to acknowledge that I should be celebrating, but also understand that I need to continue to repeat the behavior, and if I celebrate too much, I won't have the energy to repeat the behavior, right? Because, like, repeating that behavior still takes energy. You don't celebrate, woohoo, it's done, now no more energy output. No, still energy output. You still have to have energy output, so you can't celebrate in a way that, like, reduces the assumption that you have to put energy towards this thing, right? And that is the part that trips people up. It's like they celebrate, and part of their brain goes, okay, we don't need to try anymore. No more energy. No more energy allocated to this part of our thing that we're doing. Done with that. We celebrated. That's over now. We're gonna do some other thing. No! Right? Like, you're trying to build a habit. You're trying to build something that's, like, always, all the time, lifelong even, but definitely not just, like, a few months and then you're done. So, or even a few weeks and then you're done. So, like, that part of, like, ooh, time to celebrate, potentially completely tracking your progress so far. What does that sound like? That sounds like the experience of addiction to me, but that's because I base a lot of my understanding of habit building and habit forming on the habit breaking that I did with cigarettes, smoking like a pack and a half a day of Marlboro Red 100s for about 10 years, right? I have a lot of thoughts about how I was able to break that habit and how building habits work. Obviously, I'm speaking very deeply from my own experience, but I have also had a lot of enrichment and education on these topics as well as living in an environment that supports those types of behaviors. As I mentioned, local grocery stores with fresh local produce cannot be beat, just cannot be beat. Every human being deserves to have that access. Should be a right. It's not a right for most of us. So yeah, I'm at this point where should be celebrating, but like, how do you weave that celebration of the accomplishment into the continued expression of the new habit? How do you make sure that those two things are always together, that you reward yourself now? Maybe it could be a strategy where, like, once you've noticed, okay, it's been 4 weeks, we've started doing the habit, but now we're at that super fun time when we don't want to do the habit anymore and it's going to be very difficult. Well, maybe we could give ourselves some enticement, some carrots, no sticks, just carrots, but some enticement, like silver lining rewards for continuing to do the habit. That could be a strategy. Personally, yeah, like that's for sure it. Maybe like I hold off doing some of the recipes I most anticipate until that corridor of time, or perhaps I record or I don't record, right? Depending on whether sharing this moment is going to bring me more joy versus not sharing the moment is going to bring me more joy, right? So like all these different decisions about how to incorporate joy in this section of the habit building process, but really ensuring that joy is the thing that's being incorporated, that we're like underlining the fact that this is a positive and exciting experience, that we're celebrating a transition, that this is a moment to be noticed and acknowledged. And really a lot of the time it does start with just acknowledging those moments. That goes back to being present, to practicing mindfulness, and in all ways just I don't know, being here, being alive, enjoying it, kind of enjoying it, sort of, at least being happy to be here. The world is grim, but our lights are so bright. Our unique individual light that we bring the world, and our world does shine with the light of all of humanity. It's overwhelmingly brilliant and beautiful, and that brilliance and that beauty is one that I have never seen us actually argue about. We do argue a lot about evil and about what is evil and what makes human beings bad and what makes us evil and what makes us like predisposed towards destruction. I see a lot of arguments about why we suck, and I have yet to be convinced by any of those arguments that they aren't just projections of the person who's speaking them and their internal world, internal perception of the experience of existence. It kind of reminds me back in the day when, like, I don't know who it was definitely a gay man, but they were kind of taking the Bible apart, like step by step, and really explaining, historically speaking, the different influences and these different things going on in the Bible from a literary and a historical perspective, from like a personal insight kind of way. He was really funny. I think we were like sitting at a diner or something, but I don't know, it's just like his thing that he was into, so he was taking it apart. And he got to the butt sex stuff, you know, like the Sodom and Gomorrah shit, and very just blithely passed over it. Written by hurt people. Kept going. And I was like, fucking mind blown. Me never being socialized male, despite growing up quite tomboy, never would have occurred to me to make that very lucid, very in the moment insight about that particular section of the Bible. But once it was made, I was like, Yeah. Yeah. No shit. Of course. Of course. That makes so much sense. That was written by some hurt-ass people. Some hurt-ass people wrote that shit. And of course, I had to dwell on that, and I was like, wow, so if those hurt people made that stuff, then other hurt people probably made other things, which implies that hurting people is really our biggest challenge as a community, which, as I've mentioned, we are all getting really good at, like, reflexively, interpersonally relating in a way that turns the motion of hurt away and, like, kind of repels that process of transference. There's a lot of beautiful ways I've seen people push back against that process that we have all noticed happening. Many times in my life, I have chosen not to open my mouth and, like, talk, even though, like, I know I can help people by articulating things. I know that the way I articulate is helpful and moving and useful and unique and wonderful in so many ways. A lot of times I shut the fuck up because so many people are mentally vulnerable to thinking me smarter than them, better than them, more powerful than them in any way. And it's not just my reflexive dislike of being placed above others that comes up for me when I experience that type of othering. You know, the positive type of being othered is to be venerated or idealized. But I don't enjoy othering as an experience in a general sense just because I have attachment issues. So I much prefer to just continue to be included with the rest of the species as, like, a normie possible, in a as normie possible kind of way as you can possibly manage as my listener. But also, I just don't think it's good to idolize. I think they were super right about not creating false idols, and I think that if you idolized me, it would be pretty false. In the sense that there's nothing that I am that you're not also capable of being. And I do think that idolization, to a certain extent, not to the point of idolatry, but to the point of just, like, being like, oh, they're so cool, you know, like, that is fine. You can idolize me like that. But don't, like, no pedestals, alright? Like, or pits. Not a fan of the pit either. I could feel other people putting me in a pit. Not a fan. The pit and the pedestal, both places, I do not like being psychologically when it comes to the way people place me in the world in relation to themselves. And you can feel that. Everybody can feel the way we place one another in a ratio way in the world in relation to ourselves. Social status, and it can be ascribed or achieved through a variety of ways, and it's a real thing in the world that has real impacts. And I'm not trying to say I don't want to be socially wealthy. Everybody wants to have high social economy. Nobody doesn't want that. I'm just saying that for the good of our species, we have to, like, regulate how much social wealth we apply to people collectively. And that's harder, like, that's way more difficult to discuss or even accurately quantify, given how bad we are at accurately evaluating emotional labor. And that, like, social positionality is a aspect of emotional labor. It's an emotional muscle that you are stretching every time you do it. So in a society fairly incapable of accurately quantifying emotional labor, at least as far as our, like, external structures go, right, for compensating emotional labor, social structures, financial structures, organizational structures, none of them are very great at compensating emotional labor, right? Aren't I right, ladies? But it's we're gonna have to do something about that, because it's obviously as real in its consequences as physical labor. It just obviously is. And I think for a very long time as a species we've gotten along by being like, well, emotional labor is a necessity of existence. Social interconnecting, you could say, is a necessity of existence. So let's not focus on that so much, and we'll focus on all the physical labor instead, because we need to construct, reap, sow, protect, defend, conquer, rule, all of these things, including specialize in industry and in economy to the extent where anyone, in theory, can do with their hands, physical labor, anything that they want. I think it was really useful to classify emotional labor as non-existent when physical labor was so immediately necessary for our species to survive, in the sense that we created language just to talk about these things, because the emotional labor doesn't happen through language naturally. Emotional labor is nonverbal. It happens in the psychic realm. It happens in the interpersonal small motions of interaction between human beings, because we can read nonverbal signals perfectly well. So emotional labor has been declassified in value in this sense, or rather, it's never been given an accurate value because it is so deeply integral to our existence. It's kind of priceless, right? It's sort of impossible to accurately value that. But there's some very obvious inequities that have emerged out of a lack of valuing or accounting for this super integral, deeply important aspect of our survival as a species, and we need to begin to talk about emotional labor as though it can be valued, potentially monetarily valued. And what is the easiest way to do that? It's art, people. It's art. Art is emotional labor that has an economic price tag already. It's not an accurate one at all, obviously, but it's a great starting place for how to emotionally, how to accurately evaluate emotional labor, reevaluate in a way that we can, externally give honor to. Yeah, art, obviously, art. Content creators, me, obviously, this is all about me. I'm glad you got that. No pits, no pedestals. Anarchism, actual non-hierarchical means of interrelating, means being able to accurately place people, other people, on a plane at equidistance, level-wise to you. Don't idealize them, don't demean, dehumanize them, but then in your thinking like that all the time.